Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are on to Week 13, wrapping up the regular season for fantasy. How you feeling, Carson?
I'm feeling pretty good, and yeah, I guess it is coming near the end for a lot of people in standard league formats. And we did our game predictions for Week 12. We didn't do our full-on analysis of matchup previews, kind of in honor of the Thanksgiving week. So just enjoyed the games, and currently Blake has 105 correct, 75 incorrect, and I have 109 correct, 71 incorrect. So I feel like you are narrowing the gap between us, but it's kind of consistently stayed around that kind of like 4 or 5 deficit range.
Yeah, it's been a struggle all season long to kind of catch up. We've been pacing each other quite well.
Yeah.
Last week we both went 10-6 on predictions,
wow,
although
good.
with 4 different games different.
Interesting.
That kind of resulted that way. For Week 13, we do have 2 teams on a bye before 6 teams on a bye next week, and that is the 4-8 Carolina Panthers and the 4-8 Arizona Cardinals. Who would have thought those 2 teams would have the same record?
Yeah, that is surprising. I always advocate for the Cardinals shouldn't be an underdog early on in the season, but they haven't really proved themselves against that. And yeah, the Panthers got to win against the Broncos. We don't need to talk about it. Let's move on, and I'll let you take over and start with Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, Thursday Night Football, big divisional matchup here as the Buffalo Bills travel to Foxborough, taking on the New England Patriots. And let's go ahead and start with the Bills here. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are lineup locks. They're no-brainer starters. Don't get cute. Moving on to the running backs, Devin Singletary. He's touchdown-dependent flex in a bad matchup. I would avoid him if possible. New England ranks second against running backs. That is tough.
Yeah, so that means that, this offense already likes to pass, so that's kind of enticing them to do such. So yeah, I wouldn't rely on Devin Singletary if I didn't have to.
Yeah, agreed there. Moving on, I got a bit of a question here for you because I know these are going to be 2 players that you're really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah McKenzie was second on the team in targets on Thursday afternoon, I should say. 10 targets, only behind Stephon Diggs with 15. He had 6 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. Gabe Davis caught only 4 of his 5 targets for 38 yards last week. Is this news or noise in terms of the next best pass catcher past Diggs?
I think it's a little bit of noise. I mean, Isaiah McKenzie has tried to kind of poke his head through as being fantasy relevant. I'm just looking at his game log for the season. In Week 3, his highest target total besides this game was 9 targets, 7 receptions, and a touchdown in Week 3, and then he proceeded to have 6 targets, then seems to be injured and out, 5 targets, 1 target, 3 target, 4 target, 1 target, and then 10. So I would say it's noise. Despite that though, I'm not the biggest Gabe Davis fan. I think he is inconsistent and touchdown dependent, which is kind of surprising for being the what should be the apparent number 2 option in a high-octane passing offense. So, yeah, I would still probably prefer Davis over McKenzie. I think he has a more legit hold in the offense, but they're kind of both touchdown-dependent, and Diggs is just doing everything else in this offense receiving-wise. So,
yeah, that's kind of what I was leaning towards as well. Gabe Davis, I think, just has the stronger pedigree for the season in general. And like you said, with McKenzie only having 1 target the week prior to this one, that's kind of a red flag for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, still ranking Davis ahead of McKenzie, but I think both of them can be risky.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, let's move on to the Patriots now. And the big man on campus is Ramondre Stevenson. He is the only lineup lock on New England, and it's a similarly tough matchup. Although 23 targets and 18 receptions over his past 3 games keep Stevenson firmly in your lineup. There's really no reason to pull him out. He's RB8 on the season, so he's doing exceptionally well for where you drafted him. Damian Harris, on top of that, has been ruled out for Week 13 with his thigh issue, so that opens up the door for Stevenson even more. Less time to split with a fellow running back there. And then let's talk about the pass catchers briefly. Jacoby Myers did miss a little bit of time in this game, did eventually come back with a shoulder issue. He's really the only pass catcher I would consider flexing. He is currently expected to play this week. And then in the off chance that Myers is inactive, Aguilar and Devontae Parker both remain boom or bust flex options because like it's more than likely that one of them will do well, but it's like almost impossible to estimate which one it's going to be.
Yeah, it is very difficult to predict which one it will be. You would think that there would be kind of a de facto number 2 behind Myers whenever he is injured, because this is this is not the first game he's been inactive in this season, and yet it is kind of a shot in the dark about who will pick up the slack and be that boom play. So I agree with you. It is very boom or bust for Aguilar and Parker, and I do think it's funny just because we were talking about Isaiah McKenzie and kind of could he sneak into your lineup somehow? I think it's just funny that Ramondre Stevenson's consistently getting more targets than him, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and pick this game. I think I know where you're going.
I'm going to go Patriots.
Wow.
I think that the Bills scraped out a win in Detroit on Thanksgiving, and
that's true.
I just think that the Patriots are coming off of what are they coming off of? A loss to the Vikings, but it was a high scoring one.
A disappointing loss to Minnesota, I would say.
I think they're going to continue to make
the games.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was one of the games that we picked differently.
Yeah.
And at one point it was looking really good that New England was going to pull it out, and just couldn't quite get it done.
Yeah, I think the Patriots are going to continue to make this division really interesting by maybe winning this one.
Yeah, I absolutely love your optimism, and I think I'm going to take this opportunity to maybe pick a game up on you.
Dang it.
Although I would be thrilled. I'd be thrilled if the Patriots pulled this one out.
Yeah.
I am a Patriots fan.
Yeah.
But I think this is one where I hedge my bets here a little bit and go with the favorite.
Any news on Von Miller, though? I know that he's at least one Bills defensive player that might be injured.
Yeah, no, he's out indefinitely.
Yeah.
I believe with an MCL strain, although don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But I believe that is the ailment that he's suffering from.
It should be interesting in Foxborough for this one too.
I know that's another part of it, but I think just I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah,
honestly,
it's probably too good of an opportunity to pass
fun.
up on you picking differently than me.
It really is. Yeah, I was expecting you to take Bills all the way, so a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Pittsburgh Steelers at Atlanta Falcons. Let's talk about Najee Harris. He left the game prior to halftime on Monday Night Football with an abdominal injury and was ruled out shortly after the third quarter started. Monitor his status. He's kind of come on as of late, found the end zone a few times, and that really helps his fantasy assets. But if he is inactive, Benny Snell appears to be the preferred replacement. Jaylen Warren, who has shown flashes at times this season, he continues to recover from a hamstring injury that kept him out of practice all last week. So Benny Snell looked pretty good in Monday Night Football. And of course, if Jaylen Warren is active for this, it kind of complicates things. But it's a good matchup overall. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want to ask you, would you be looking to start either of those replacements? I guess Snell, in a reality where there's no Warren, is probably the most enticing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because the two teams that are on a bye, like James Conner and then Deontay Foreman.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're hurting that bad. I don't know if you're hurting that bad to be looking for a backup in Pittsburgh,
sure.
who in general is kind of a low-scoring offense. But starting running backs are hard to come by in Week 13
for sure
in the season. So if you can find yourself rostering one of those, you may see the upside in playing one.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I stand on that. And then on to the pass catchers here. George Pickens and Deontay Johnson both scored around 10 fantasy points in Week 12. Pickens is definitely the higher upside play, contesting catches and just making acrobatic plays. He's got 3 total touchdowns on the season, one of those being a rushing touchdown. And then Deontay Johnson remains a low-end flex, which it's just been unfortunate. We've kind of discussed it all season long. There is a very favorable stretch of games upcoming for these pass catchers that hopefully may allow for increased fantasy production. But the real issue here is that pass catchers in general have limited upside in this offense with Kenny Pickett. He continues to develop as a rookie. 20 completions last week resulted in just 174 passing yards last week.
Yeah, that's rough. And a win too against the Colts, which I think we both picked the Colts to win that one.
Yeah, we picked that one wrong.
Do you expect maybe Kenny to let it fly with Najee being out? If he can.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's kind of the challenge. Is like I think that Atlanta likes to control the game through the ground, and so there may be fewer possessions in general in this game if that's the case. So I don't know. We just really haven't seen it from Kenny Pickett yet.
Yeah,
in terms of really putting up
he's
big
done more
numbers
than
through
30
the air.
completions twice, but he threw for 52 and 44 attempts in each of those. So, and only 28
and not
last
only
night.
the completions, because obviously PPR does value completions, but we're talking too about yardage totals here.
Yeah.
Like he hasn't eclipsed 250 except 3 times this year.
Yeah.
So in what looks like 8 games played. So that's not a great ratio.
Yeah, I think that's fair then.
Yeah, on the other side of this matchup, very short, very sweet. There are no lineup locks on Atlanta. Cordero Patterson is a touchdown-dependent flex. It was good to see him get a little bit more involved in the passing game. Did grab, I want to say, 3 of 5 targets. So that's a little bit good, but those numbers are not what we were expecting when we drafted him earlier this season, for sure.
Yeah.
This is a close game, a tough call to say the least.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go Falcons, though, just with no Najee and maybe having to rely on Pickett, I think could be difficult for the whereas the Falcons can just kind of do their thing, which is really boring for fantasy, but it gets them some wins, surprisingly.
Yeah, I think, I've been picking with the Falcons a lot lately, I feel like. And I don't necessarily want to throw away my potential Bills win, so I'm going to join you on this one. We're running out of weeks for me to catch up with you, so I got to pick and choose where I go.
And real quick, Kyle Pitts out for the season?
Yeah, he has been officially declared out for the rest of the year. That was, sort of expected. Their season's not really seemingly going anywhere despite being in contention in the AFC South. Or the NFC South.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things that, hopefully next year he's back and better and they learn how to use him in the offseason. So
yeah, for sure.
He can be dropped. Let's go ahead and move on to the Denver Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens. And you wrote the notes for these, so I'll let you take over here for a sec.
Are you sure? I don't. No, you did. I didn't write this.
No, you did. I promise you. I promise you did.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, the Broncos. I did write this. After the release of Melvin... I already picked the Ravens, just by the way, let the record show. I'm not picking the Denver Donkeys anymore. After the release of Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray played 82% of snaps and rushed for 92 yards on 13 carries. I mean, that sounds pretty good. So how do you value Latavius Murray going forward?
Well, here's the thing. Touchdown-dependent flex, for sure. And you're hitching your wagon to the worst offense in the NFL. So the touchdown upside it's hard to come by. So I think he is, a touchdown-dependent flex at best. And that's kind of where I'm leaning with him. I have him rostered on my team. He is not making it, and we have 2 flexes in that league.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. Touchdown dependent for sure, because I don't really think he had many, if any, receptions. So you are relying on him getting a lot of rushing yards, and that's difficult in this offense for whatever reason. In the absence of Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton had 6 receptions for 75 yards. That's 3 straight double-digit fantasy scores for him, although they are pretty low double-digit. But is he worth making your starting lineup? I would say it's at least a low-end flex.
I would as well. I would agree with that. Double digits is pretty much what you're banking on when you're picking flexes. Yeah. There aren't many teams on a bye this week, so you may have better options, but I can certainly see an argument being made for Sutton making your lineup. I think the real concern is if Jerry Jeudy plays, you can get it's a wide range of outcomes with Courtland Sutton, as we've seen this year, with Jerry Jeudy on the field.
Yeah.
There have been weeks where he has boomed, and there have been weeks where he's completely disappeared. And so it becomes a little riskier if Judy plays. So monitor that situation.
I'm just still so confused on how Russell Wilson in this offense is so bad. Moving on to the Ravens.
Let's not bum the people out too much.
Gus Edwards returned from injury, playing 50% of snaps and rushed for 52 yards and a touchdown on 16 carries, so pretty productive day for him. But J.K. Dobbins is waiting in the wing. He's expected to return to practice this week, so I mean that hurts Edwards' value, standalone value, if Dobbins returns, and we'll see what Dobbins can do if he's healthy. I picked him up off the waivers because, like, why not? But we'll see what happens. Lamar Jackson completed 6 passes to wide receivers. Thought that was a fun fact. And 8 passes to 2 tight ends, Mark Andrews and Josh Oliver. Isaiah Likely was inactive, because you might have expected him to be the other tight end that got receptions. And this allowed for Josh Oliver to surprisingly lead the team in receiving yards and catch a touchdown. So, even though Lamar has had some kind of underwhelming performances, I would still say he's a lock. And outside of him, and I guess probably Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
Is that debatable? I'll just ask, which Ravens players are you interested in starting?
Are you asking if it's debatable if Andrews is a lock?
Yeah. I would say that's not debatable. He is a lock.
Right. He is a lock. Yes, agreed.
And outside
the phrasing was a little weird.
Outside of him and Lamar, are you starting anyone on the Ravens?
I mean, not voluntarily.
Yeah,
I would say.
It seems like no.
Yeah, no, correct. There are 2 players. It's the quarterback, it's the tight end, and the running back if you're feeling lucky. Although, Denver claims to have a good defense.
No, they do have a good defense. There's no claim. I'll have some positivity of the Broncos right now. I saw some stat that if they averaged like 19 points on offense, NFL points, they would be like, where are we right now? Like 10-2
Super Bowl winners.
They'd be like 10-1, 9-2, something ridiculous. 19-point average on offense is not that high. Their defense is not the one to blame. No. This is like Zach Wilson saying he didn't let the defense down. We saw where that got him. We're both picking the Ravens.
Yeah.
Moving on to Packers and Bears.
Yeah. Yep, and I'll take back over here. Aaron Jones is a lineup lock. No arguing that. He's been great lately over the past month or so. A.J. Dillon scored 17.8 fantasy points on 11 touches last week. Very reminiscent of his Week 1 performance, coincidentally the only other game where he found the end zone this season. It's a favorable matchup for these running backs, but Dillon is extremely touchdown dependent, as we've seen. Flex at your own risk. I personally would not. You picked him up in our league this week after I had been rostering him all season long. So what are your intentions with him?
I'm not starting him this week. We'll see what happens. I mean, I dropped Allen
Robinson. Maybe next week when he's on bye?
Yeah, maybe. I dropped Allen Robinson, who's out for the rest of the season. We'll talk about that fun offense later. And Romeo Doubs to pick up J.K. Dobbins and A.J. Dillon. So just gave me some running back depth on players that should have the potential but haven't done it. So, like, maybe. I mean, they were both sixth round picks in our drafts. So that was kind of funny. I think to my bench.
Well, sure. I mean, but we've seen how they've performed this year, so it kind of makes sense. And I think you also just, looking for a little bit of depth after that ETN scare.
Yes.
That we'll talk about later.
Yes.
Moving on to this team as well. Aaron Rodgers left last week's game with a rib issue. He does expect to play this week. That is per the Pat McAfee show, so you can count that. Jordan Love showed signs of utility to the point where I wouldn't downgrade any of the pass catchers if he was named the starter, but it looks like Rodgers is going to play. He's trending in that direction.
He's also
Christian Watson
let me just add with Aaron Rodgers. He's also like playing through a broken thumb, I've heard. Is that true? Have you heard that too?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah. So maybe that makes Jordan Love more reliable, potentially. I don't know. That might be bold to say that, but...
Yeah, I think if Rodgers has a pulse, they're going to continue to start him. They're paying him too much, and he's just done too much for the franchise for them to bench him, I feel like, at this point.
I agree.
So moving on to the pass catchers, Christian Watson found the end zone for the 3rd consecutive game on 4 of 6 targets for 110 yards. This breakout production has occurred in Dobbs' absence, and he did miss practice all last week. I'll ask you, does the potential return of Romeo Doubs create any sense of hesitancy around starting Watson at Chicago this week?
Not really. Dobbs wasn't this touchdown monster while he was healthy. He got 3 in the 9. He got injured in the 9th game, and so 3. So he was on a pretty good pace, but not Christian Watson's pace. So
no, certainly not.
I didn't feel like rostering
He's gotten
him
3
anymore.
in one game before.
I didn't feel like rostering him anymore.
Yeah, Dobbs.
So that's enough of my analysis. I want to share a funny tweet that I saw. It was talking about like Linsanity, right? And so it was like the Christian Watson version of that as he emerged is just called Christianity. I just thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I guess Christian Watson's emerged to be... you're about to talk about Allen Lazard. It has been equally... it's been equally baffling how he hasn't done anything in the absence of Dobbs or any other wide receiver that you would think would be of value. And it's just all going to Watson.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to get to that too. So Lazard played 100% of the snaps last week and yet matched season lows in both receptions and targets. 2 catches, 3 targets. 3 consecutive weeks of scoring wide receiver 36 or worse. And trust me, those worse than 36 are really bad. I think the biggest takeaway from this, honestly, is that Watson and Lazard are both touchdown-dependent flex options. Watson has been getting it done lately. I don't know if that's... I mean, it certainly can't sustain at the pace that he's on, which is 2 touchdowns a game. But Lazard... right, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
But Lazard, when he has found success in fantasy this season, it has been resulting from a touchdown most often. So these guys are both touchdown-dependent flexes, and it's kind of risky to play either one, I feel, even though Watson has just been lighting the world on fire.
I didn't realize that. I knew that Watson had a big body presence that made him a red zone threat. He's 6'5", but Allen Lazard is also 6'5". I didn't realize that.
Yes. Yep, they got the Twin Towers over there.
Yeah, I guess so. Watson is averaging, like you said, 2 receiving touchdowns a game on 4 receptions a game. I mean, that's more efficient than Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I know. You love pointing that out.
I do.
Okay, well, let's move on to the Bears on the other side of this game before we pick. So Justin Fields was ruled out last week with a shoulder issue. He has a chance to return this week, monitor his status. I think practice participation is going to be very important to watch, as a limited Justin Fields is much less fantasy viable than when he is fully healthy because, like I talked about last week, if he is dealing with that shoulder issue, he's not going to want to be taking unnecessary hits that often come from, being a runner. And so that's going to limit his upside because, in general, we've seen Chicago struggle to put up big passing numbers as an offense. So anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, when he boomed, 2 weeks in a row, 3 weeks in a row, even more, Justin Fields I'm talking about, it was not because he learned how to pass. Not even close. It's because he had 2 games with over 100 rushing yards and at least 1 rushing touchdown for 5 straight games. So, yeah.
That's not entirely fair. I would say, just because he was putting up touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns passing touchdowns in that 3-game stretch.
But he's still his season high in passing yardage is still 208. That's a season high. So yes, you're right. He became more efficient finding the end zone, but it's not like this offense really changed. He was just becoming more efficient.
Yeah, and for him in general, I think it's that's what you need to focus on is he putting a full practice in this week, or is he limited coming into Sunday, and that's the concern of whether you should start him or not. Moving on, David Montgomery is a borderline lineup lock, while Khalil Herbert remains on IR. He's been performing well. And Chase Claypool should see an uptick in targets. Remember him when he got traded there? Yeah. Following the season-ending injury suffered by Darnell Mooney. Unfortunate to see that. But like I've been saying, Chicago's the run-heaviest offense in the league. All pass catchers have limited upside in general, very similar to Atlanta or other teams that we've talked about, like Pittsburgh. So, it's a tough spot for any pass catcher there. We saw Byron Pringle find the end zone last week. I wouldn't necessarily consider him a fantasy asset moving forward, but that's kind of what we're dealing with there. Same thing goes for Cole Kmet in terms of what I said with Claypool. I think his targets will go up a little bit with Mooney gone. He saw 6 targets in week 12, and that's pretty respectable among tight ends.
Yeah. I'm gonna pick the Packers.
Yeah, I'm gonna join you on that. I think that I think there's a very realistic chance with Chicago being 3-9 going into this game that they give Justin Fields one more week and then rest through the bye, and then he's healthy the rest of the way. That's kind of my armchair physician's approach on this.
I can't believe the Packers are 4-8. Do you not see reality? I know they're paying Rodgers a ton, but just to let him, because they probably aren't playing for anything either. I don't know what the mindset would be on. It's different because he's old, so you're not really risking a long-term career at this point like you would be with Fields by doing anything too soon. So I guess it's probably a different mindset.
And Minnesota has a clear hold on that division, being 9-2. So they really aren't. I mean, I guess they could potentially be in the hunt as a wild card at some point, but it seems very unlikely. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, and that is the Jaguars at the Lions. This is another close game by spread, 1 point between them. Travis Etienne avoided significant injury to his surgically repaired foot that kept him out all of last season, so that was good to see. Initial reports suggest Etienne will not miss additional time. Monitor his status. JaMychal Hasty should be rostered as the primary handcuff. I noticed you hadn't picked him up, but he performed pretty well. 12 carries for 28 yards, as well as 5 catches for 67 and a touchdown.
Should I go do that
Moving
now?
On to the
That's something I will say, though,
before
you move on to the pass catchers. I've read that Etienne was even cleared to return in that game, but they didn't want to risk it.
Yeah, and that's why he was never officially ruled out, like you said. But I think it was probably the right decision, considering it was that same foot.
I'm just saying I have more confidence in him playing this week, hearing that.
No, absolutely. I think it's more of a a handcuff, an insurance policy, if anything.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Zay Jones had a huge performance, catching 11 of 14 targets for 145 yards and the game-winning 2-point conversion. I got that call right. That was really exciting. Taking down the Ravens. And back-to-back games with at least 8 catches and 10-plus targets. Is Zay Jones a lock at flex?
Yeah. We've seen him do it early in the season, and I'm more inclined to believe with that sort of a stat line that it's legit, rather than, Isaiah McKenzie had good games early in the season, but I don't think his stat line's as legit. So that's the difference there. So I would say that, I think Zay Jones could make your lineup, and you can feel somewhat good about it because he's done it with reliable stats. I mean, that's wide receiver one. That's a wide receiver one stat line. That's a Stephon Diggs stat line.
Yeah, most definitely.
So that's the difference.
No, I agree with you on that. And then for Christian Kirk, he's the wide receiver 10 on the season. He obviously did not have a great game last week, but better days are ahead. He's a must-start given the matchup. I don't think there's any arguing that.
I will not argue it.
Excellent. Moving on to the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the only lineup lock on Detroit. Jamal Williams has at least 1 rushing touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. That makes him a flex plus option, meaning he's kind of like a borderline RB2, especially in deeper leagues. But it's a good matchup against Jacksonville. I think that, with those kind of stats, what's to say that he doesn't score another rushing touchdown? That's just kind of how they're using him. Yeah. DeAndre Swift has been held back by the coaching staff, playing less than 35% of the snaps in 4 consecutive weeks. Makes it very frustrating for fantasy managers who roster him. He did see 8 targets in Week 12 against Buffalo. That was with an extra, quarter of football with that game going into overtime. But Swift has been a low-end fringe RB2 despite low volume usage. I would say he's a flex at your own risk kind of play. Any thoughts on that?
On Swift, that's just so weird to be talking about that, but that is true. He's not getting the usage, and Jamal Williams is taking all of the rushing touchdowns. So, yeah, I don't think that's unfair analysis.
Yeah. All right, well, let's pick this game. Where are you going?
I think I'm going Jaguars. I do want to ask you real quick, though. Do you know of any news of Darrell Henderson potentially taking that role from JaMychal Hasty if Etienne was to be out?
I would really doubt it, considering how poorly he was performing in LA.
Yeah.
I'm picking the Lions, by the way, in this one.
Yeah.
But I think Darrell Henderson is probably going to be. He may be active this week. He was not active last week, but he may be involved a little bit. But I would still expect JaMychal Hasty. He seems to be, in terms of how he was being used, to be a sufficient replacement for that offense.
Yeah, I would say Henderson being there probably hurts Hasty's standalone value for this game if Etienne was out more than it hurts Etienne's value if he's just healthy and back to normal. That's kind of.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not really worried about Darrell Henderson doing much of anything in this.
I wasn't very happy to see that him join them, though. If I'm being honest, I was just like, why? Just let Etienne. I think they still will, but still, I didn't like reading that headline.
Yeah.
So yeah, I picked the Jaguars, but picking the Lions.
Mm-hmm. All right, on to the next one, and that is the Cleveland Browns at the Houston Texans.
Wow, here we go.
Yeah, schedule makers, am I right?
Yeah.
So the return of Deshaun Watson is here, playing his former team. I do expect a little bit of rust, although I read a report recently saying that historically when players come back, specifically quarterbacks, when they return from extended periods of, inactivity, we'll call it, they've generally performed well season long. So while the very first game may be a little rusty, it's a fantastic matchup.
Yeah.
Houston is just a very bad team in general.
Yeah.
I mean, they have one win coming into this week. So poetic justice would be them winning this game, but I don't expect it. It's been over seven... Pick them then, please. It's been over 700 days since Deshaun Watson played, but he is coming back. And I'll ask you this. What scenario are you starting Watson this week?
If you are feeling risky and you need a win to get into the playoffs and your current quarterback does not have a high ceiling, I would throw Watson in there. But I think it's risky.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's look back to all the way back to our quarterback ranking video in the preseason, and I ranked Deshaun Watson as a bye week fill-in just because I knew that he was going to be missing a lot of games. Otherwise, I would consider him a QB1.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I think if you have Kyler Murray and you picked up Deshaun Watson, preparing for this debut performance, I think that's a great opportunity for that.
That's a good example.
Yeah, I think if you've been rostering Tom Brady, I think if you've been rostering Aaron Rodgers, that Deshaun Watson is a likely upgrade. So I think that I think there are opportunities in a one quarterback 10-team league where you can find yourself starting Deshaun Watson, and it's probably the right move. So that's kind of where I feel about that.
Yeah, I read something while we were recording that, and I have Lamar Jackson, and then I picked up Deshaun Watson, so that's my situation. So I read something while we were recording that Lamar Jackson left practice early. So maybe Deshaun Watson will force my hand, not the best wording for him, and become my starting quarterback.
That was good.
Thanks.
All right. Well, let's move on to the lineup blocks for sure starters, and that's Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper on this team. David Njoku returns tight end 1 production after struggling in week 11, so I think he is a option to start at tight end. You can't get too picky with tight ends if you don't have one of the best. So Njoku you can certainly do worse than David Njoku. And then I'll ask you this, Carson. After 5 consecutive double-digit scoring games for Donovan Peoples-Jones, he finished last week as wide receiver 85. Does the return of Deshaun Watson make you more or less inclined to trust DPJ at flex?
You would think more, but I want to see what this offense looks like with Watson behind center, because I honestly think that Cooper and Njoku could be his top 2 pass catchers, and I don't know how much that really leaves for DPJ.
Okay. I think I'm going to say if you've been using Peoples-Jones as your flex, you probably don't have better options.
Yes.
And
that's fair.
While he has been performing well over the last month or so, I think that if you're still in a position where DPJ is your best flex option, I think you can start him.
Yeah.
Because, he's a talented player. We've seen it from him. Let's move on to the Texans now. Dameon Pierce has struggled over the past 2 weeks, scoring a combined 8.3 fantasy points. That is bad.
Yeah.
Cleveland has been notoriously bad, speaking of, at defending against running backs this season, and Pierce should still at least be a lock at flex this week with only 2 teams on bye. Anything to add there?
No, I think that's fair. He had been doing so well for a long stretch of games to now, what you're saying is a good matchup, to bench him.
Mm-hmm.
You think the Cleveland defense would be better against running backs if they're practicing against Nick Chubb all week, but maybe he just batters them up.
No, they're demoralized.
Yeah, exactly.
They can't stop him, so they just don't even try against anyone else.
That's funny.
Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins remain low-end flex options. On a Houston team that generally struggles to move the ball through the air, Kyle Allen was certainly no relief for this team in place of Davis Mills last week, so not really an upgrade there. I'm going to throw out a sleeper option at tight end here, and that's Jordan Akins. He put up 15.1 fantasy points last week, mostly in garbage time, but they all count the same.
Yeah.
He's finished as a tight end 1, meaning inside the top 10 of that position, in 2 of his last 3 games. 11 targets over the past 3 weeks, but 10 catches. That speaks to high efficiency usage. You like to see that. So you've got a question further down the road about who's better than Foster Moreau, and I'm going to throw Jordan Akins in there.
Wow. All right. That's interesting. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I don't think that's unfair. I think you have some affinity to Texans tight ends. I remember for a good stretch of time for DFS, we were talking about
Brevin Jordan in DFS.
Yeah, and I think
That's
Jordan
right.
Atkins might have honestly been there at the same time, but it's just been kind of inconsistent
that
on
might be
which
true.
one is more valuable for fantasy.
Definitely.
Yeah, I am going to pick the Browns, even though it'd be quite serendipitous for the Texans to beat
Come
Deshaun
on.
Watson.
Yeah, I'm going to join you. They're 7-point favorites on the road. It's I'm not quite sure Houston's hit their stride.
Yeah, I guess not.
All right, let's talk about Jets at the Vikings. Mike White. Okay, there you go. 22 completions, 28 attempts, 315 yards, 3 touchdowns. Can Mike White do it again at Minnesota, who just allowed Mac Jones to throw for 382 yards and 2 touchdowns on Thanksgiving night?
Sure. He's done well in his previous... This is not the first time he's been efficient.
No, and I'm going to go into that right here. So we've seen Magic Mike perform well in the past.
Is
Last
that actually
season,
the nickname? Or is that what you're coining? I just
no,
need to know.
well, I mean, the Channing Tatum movie, right?
Yeah, no, I know, but like, do people actually call him that? Like, NFL analysts?
It's going to catch on.
Yeah,
It's going to catch on.
It might.
So anyway, last season against Cincinnati in Week 8, White went for 37 of 45, 405 passing yards, and 3 touchdowns. He also threw 2 interceptions. Don't wanna gas him up too much.
Yeah.
And then following that performance, just in case he was fully gassed, we're gonna empty his tank here. Just 2 weeks later against Buffalo, he had 4 interceptions, 0 touchdowns in that game. So he feels like a risky starter in 1 QB leagues with just 2 teams on bye. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think he's risky. I agree with that. But he has proven to have that ceiling. So just another player, if you're shooting for the ceiling, maybe add Mike White. I know we're going to go on to talk about the Vikings, but I just saw like a tweet, I think, after last Sunday of when Mike White did this, and it's just like, next week we have Mike White versus 1 p.m. Kirk Cousins. It's going to be an amazing game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm rooting for him. I think that it really just it looks bad on this franchise that they gave Zach Wilson so much run when they had Mike White in the
How old
ready
is
to
he?
go.
Do you know?
He's been in the league for, I want to say, 5 years now.
Okay.
So he's going to be in his late 20s.
I'm trying to
while
find
you
it
look that
right
up,
now.
I'll keep talking about the pass catchers here.
27, by the way.
There you go.
Yes.
Garrett Wilson had another top 6 performance, catching 5 of 8 targets for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. He feels like a lock at flex, as the talent is obviously there for him. We've seen it earlier in the year with Joe Flacco, now with Mike White. The common denominator is Garrett Wilson and Zach Wilson not being on the field. So I like both of those aspects for Wilson moving forward. Garrett, that is. Moving on. Elijah Moore also managed to find the end zone for the first time this season, catching both of his targets, both meaning 2, for a total of 64 yards. He played just 35% of the snaps, making him a boom-bust flex option. I would say a risky option. I mean, that's kind of entailed in boom-bust.
We know the talent's there, but the way they've been using him, it's a ton of behind-the-scenes stuff, I'm sure, and that's actually known.
Yeah.
So I feel bad for him.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of it has come from him not wanting to play with Zach Wilson more than the actual coaching staff. I don't know all the details. I'm just saying I feel bad for him.
Yeah. Are you aware of the conspiracy that he's got a burner account on Twitter?
Oh, that's
similar to
that's fine by
Kevin
me.
Durant?
I have heard about that. That's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, he's coming off of a very solid rookie season, and then they're forcing Zach Wilson as soon as he's healthy, and then Garrett Wilson is immediately the focal point of the offense, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it's completely phased Elijah Moore out of the offense rather than just having a 1-2 punch in the passing attack. So it's weird. It's weird. I'll ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you think that Zach Wilson will ever start a game again?
I hope not.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, well, you know what? Next season, when the Patriots play the Jets, I hope they start Zach Wilson. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it'd be so funny if his last game as a starter, I'm not talking about like maybe he goes and becomes like a backup journeyman and then has to start a game because of an injury, but like a legit starter for a team. I think it'd be funny if his last press conference after his last legit starting performance for a team was whenever he says, "No, I don't feel bad for the defense." That would just be...
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't like him. We love him.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. So let's talk about a few more players here. Corey Davis had a quiet return to game action since we last saw him all the way back in Week 7. He had 1 catch on 3 targets for just 9 yards. I would say keep him on your bench, despite the fact that he nearly outsnapped Elijah Moore 2-1. The production was not there for him. Michael Carter is considered day-to-day with an ankle injury. It's classified as a low ankle sprain, so not the more severe high ankle sprain, which is good. Monitor his status. James Robinson was a healthy scratch last week. That was an interesting trade to acquire him, considering he's done nothing. Keep an eye on news moving forward regarding his involvement. But otherwise, Zonovan Knight is the man of the hour. He made his NFL debut in Carter's absence and amassed 103 total yards from scrimmage on 17 touches. You like to see that. Despite scoring fewer fantasy points than Ty Johnson, who found the end zone on just 6 touches, Knight dominated in snap percentage following Carter's departure and should be the top waiver ad of this backfield.
Are you looking to start him if Carter is inactive?
Looking to start him might be a strong phrase.
Yeah.
But it kind of falls along the same lines of it depends on what James Robinson, if he's active.
Yeah.
It depends on... I think that's kind of the big contingency. Otherwise, it comes down to what else do you have at running back and flex that would leave you in a position where you would start that player.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the challenge there.
Yeah, I look at it. I don't feel like it seems super legit, but it's hard to just like completely overlook his involvement last week. It's just so weird of James Robinson being a healthy scratch. And their coach, Robert Saleh, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know I hear a lot of people saying like potential coach of the year, what he's done with the Jets. I mean, what are they, 7-4? I mean, that's surprising. I don't know if he's actually in talks for that, but people have been obviously praising him because of how the Jets are doing. But it is interesting that, you know, you got two players that seem to be having some it's just Elijah Moore and James Robinson is what I'm trying to focus on. Elijah Moore is completely, for whatever reason, behind the scenes, been kind of thrown to the back, even though he shouldn't be. And then now James Robinson they trade for, and he's a healthy scratch. Like, that's weird. That seems like weird management to me. And then Zach Wilson is the prime example, forcing him and still being 7-4. It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah,
it's weird.
No, and I would say in terms of coach of the year, I think there are several teams that are ahead of that. Say Minnesota, Philadelphia, Miami, just to name a few. Sure. Those are all first-year, except for Sirianni. Those are all first-year coaches with their franchises. So I think that's a little bit more impressive.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a Patriots fan, I kind of got to knock the Jets down every chance I get. Sure. Let's talk about the Vikings next. Speaking of, and every time I write notes for Minnesota, it feels like the easiest team to tell who are the players that need to be played.
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins proved the doubters wrong with a strong showing in prime time on Thanksgiving night.
Can't believe it.
Yeah, it was fair. I was kind of banking on that when I picked the Patriots in that game, but alas, that was not the case. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen both found the end zone and scored 20-plus fantasy points. TJ Hawkinson also found the end zone, put up a respectable 15.3 fantasy points on 5 receptions. Dalvin Cook is the one disappointment on this team, but chalk it up to the New England defense against running backs, like we talked about earlier. Better days are ahead for the 6-year back, who, knock on wood, has yet to miss a game this season.
Well, yeah, that usually is a big struggle for him. I think what makes this offense so easy to analyze for fantasy purposes is that they perfectly emulate like a fantasy starting lineup. They have a solid QB that's a great bye week fill-in. If it's not prime time, but he proved us wrong with this one. 2,
right, more often than not,
arguably the wide receiver 1 and a very solid, albeit somewhat touchdown dependent, wide receiver 2. I don't know, I might have said RB on accident. A good tight end in TJ Hawkinson now, and then a borderline elite, more likely low-end RB1 in Dalvin Cook. Like, that just fills up your lineup right there.
Yeah, and we're both picking the Vikings, not necessarily for that reason, but I think, you know, there's every possibility that Mike White falls back down to earth and struggles a little bit against a really solid team in the Minnesota Vikings. They are at home in this one, so the 3-point favorites, we're picking them.
They are so quietly 9-2. They really are, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, you know, when your division is worthless, it's kind of, there's no reason to really pump your chest.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. All right, well, we split this matchup, so it's for notes. I've got the Commanders, you've got the Giants. Let's talk about the Commanders real quick. Brian Robinson was the big winner among Washington players in fantasy last week, producing his first weekly finish inside the top 10. Good for him. 18 rushes, 105 yards, 2 catches on 3 targets for 20 yards and a touchdown. It was nice to see him get a little bit more involvement in the passing game. He's been pretty non-involved in that aspect generally since he's returned to the team. Although the stat line does still prove that he's touchdown dependent, if anything, I would consider this to be a sell high opportunity if the trade deadline in your league hasn't already passed. There are some leagues that go beyond week 12, week 13, and that would be a place where I would be looking to deal Brian Robinson off of this high performance. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. I'm more enticed by Brian Robinson for his future, especially if Antonio Gibson was to go to a different team. I don't know how likely that is, but just his usage as, you don't like for PPR that he doesn't get a lot of receptions, but he consistently has high volume and rushing, and he's only a rookie.
Yeah.
And he'd even start in week 1. He literally was shot. So he hasn't even had a full season or even close to it. So it is enticing to see that, but I think it's more for future seasons than how I'm feeling about my fantasy playoffs this season.
Yeah, certainly a good prospect in dynasty leagues.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the pass catchers here, and specifically I want to focus on Curtis Samuel. He continues to struggle. He has been targeted 4 times or fewer in 5 consecutive weeks. Weekly finishes of wide receiver 38 or worse in all but one of those weeks. He was wide receiver 14 against Minnesota in week 9. Is Curtis Samuel droppable given the tough matchup and upcoming bye week?
I think he is. And I think
Yeah.
it hurts to say that. It's not common for someone to be one of the best waiver ads at the beginning of the season to then be droppable by the end of the same season, but that seems like what's happening. Because he started the season so strong.
And I think one of the psychological things about fantasy football is you look at his player card and he shows as wide receiver 23 on the season on a points per game basis. How can you justify dropping a quote-unquote wide receiver 2?
Yeah.
But when you look at the numbers, especially over this last month and a half, he's just been really difficult to roster. He's been very inconsistent and just not someone that's really going to win you many weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I like how Sleeper does the green, yellow, red for like stats on kind of their proficiency, and you see a lot of red in the last 4 or 5 weeks in receptions and targets.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Yeah.
That is not good. All right, you want me to take over?
Yep.
I got the Giants. So Saquon Barkley. Oh, in a close game against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, they got a late touchdown and then didn't get the onside kick back against the Cowboys. So it was a close one, close divisional matchup. But Saquon Barkley has had a combined 61 rushing yards in his last 2 games, but a rushing touchdown salvage this day on Thanksgiving. You're starting him, but this is a little concerning heading into the fantasy playoffs, I would say, to see this sort of usage. It's not really usage,
and by the way,
efficiency.
Yeah, by the way, it's another divisional matchup. So
that's true.
Perhaps another competitive close game.
Yeah, and I want to pull up who. So obviously, no, I don't want to look at the Cowboys. I want to look at the Giants. Obviously, he faced the Cowboys last week, who have a very, very good defense. I'm just trying to remember who he faced in Week 11. I can't even pull it up. Where is it? I don't know. Check that for me.
So Week 11 was at Houston. That's one of the best matchups.
Yeah, so that is concerning. So hopefully he can get back.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Nope.
No, I think
My apologies.
I think you're
talking
right.
about no. Week 11 Detroit for the Giants.
Okay, well that's also a good matchup. Not as good as the Texans, but still it was disappointing.
Yeah.
Anyways, you're starting him. Just I hope, because I have him, that he gets back on that elite form that he was at previously for pretty much the entire season before these past 2 games.
Yeah, with Barkley and ETN combined, you're kind of nervous.
Yeah, a little bit. Ramondre Stevenson's gonna make me happy with his PPR floor, though. That's all I know.
That's true.
Following the season-ending injury that Wan'Dale Robinson suffered in Week 11, Richie James played in 70% of snaps, which he had not done since Week 3, and he scored a late receiving touchdown on 5 receptions for 41 yards. Before I ask you about him, I'm also going to talk about Darius Slayton, who led the team in receiving yards with 63 on 3 receptions, most of that coming from a 44-yard reception. So are you interested in rostering any Giants pass catcher?
Interested, I think, is the wrong word. I think if I was desperate enough, I would roster one of these wide receivers.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that Daniel Bellinger may be making his return this week after he had that, I think it was like a fractured eye socket or something. But, yeah, he was a player that we kind of highlighted briefly before he was injured as a potential, tight end sleeper. But, yeah, no, I think if you're really picking between Giants wide receivers, you're in a bad spot. Yeah. And it's probably not your year. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah. This is a close one. Commanders are the favorite on the road, but I'm going to pick the Giants.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did, because I've been picking against the Commanders for multiple weeks, and I've always been wrong. So they are quietly 7-5.
I'm
going to start giving them some props.
I can't believe they're 7-5.
I know. I'm going to start giving them some props, and I'm going to pick them in this one against the Giants, as you said.
What a division. A division that just 2 seasons ago was kind of unanimously considered the worst.
Yeah, it's pretty much the exact opposite of the AFC West.
Except,
And I mean, technically it is, because NFC East, like, it doesn't get any more opposite than that.
yeah, that's true.
So
but
that's kind of funny.
The AFC West, which was propped up to be the greatest division of all time, they do still have arguably the best team in the NFL with the Chiefs, arguably. So, they are very top heavy, but that's been disappointing to say the least. We'll move on to Titans at Eagles. So, with the Titans, this is your notes. I am realizing.
Yeah, I was going to jump in, but it's okay. Titans at Eagles. Derrick Henry is the only lineup lock for Tennessee. Treylon Burks found the end zone for his first career touchdown thanks to Derrick Henry being stripped near the goal line and Burks subsequently falling on the loose ball for the score. So that was kind of fun to watch. Yeah. However, we've seen promising usage out of Burks in back-to-back weeks now, with a combined 181 receiving yards in that span. I'm going to ask you, Carson, is Burks a flex consideration this week, or is the matchup at Philadelphia too risky?
I think Burks is a flex option this week. We've seen the Eagles give up 33 to the Packers, a lot of that from Jordan Love, and 16 to the Colts. That's not a whole lot, but their loss to the Commanders, they gave up 32. A lot of it from
Jordan Love.
I'm just looking back at their last 3 games and seeing that they're giving up quite a few points, which has not been the norm for them.
I got you.
So yeah, I think he is. I think he's definitely in flex consideration. He's kind of breaking out, coming back from his injury, and I'm happy to see that from him.
Yeah, me too. I think he's a flex consideration. Although I think you should keep in mind that matchup, they do have one of the best secondaries, and it just makes you a little nervous. Yeah. If you're desperate, I think throw him out there. On to the Eagles. Jalen Hurts did his best Justin Fields impression on Sunday Night Football, racking up 157 rushing yards on 17 carries, also finding the end zone twice through the air for a strong QB1 performance. Miles Sanders also put in a dominant performance, rushing 21 times for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns, with 3 receptions for 17 yards as well.
He was on my opponent's bench last week, and that was nice because that would have beat me if he played him.
See, I wish that my opponent had him on their bench in another league, because that's what ultimately did me in last week. So it goes both ways, folks.
Yep.
And then on the last note, we kind of talked about, is there a chance that one of these Eagles tight ends fills the Dallas Goedert role while Goedert is on IR? And it does not appear that's the case. Only one target in last week's game was intended for a tight end. The rookie Grant Calcaterra caught one last week. Look elsewhere.
Yeah.
As Goedert continues to recover, the replacement option is not on Philadelphia's roster.
Yeah, and we kind of expected that, but it really proved itself last week. I think Miles Sanders proved to you that you can't really bench him. And even if A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are kind of like, because the rushing game's doing super well, I think you still have to start them both. Yep. So that's really how it goes, and I'm picking the Eagles with you as my prediction for a 0-17 season for the Titans continues. I don't know. Maybe I did pick them before. I just feel like I haven't.
I'm sure you did, and I think, at some point here I'll go back and review that. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. You really bash on the Titans.
I do.
You are not a believer.
I'm not.
All right, these are your notes coming up, so you got it.
Cool. Moving on to Sunday afternoon, Dolphins at 49ers, which should be a really good one. That could be the game of the week.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
I always pick one for that, but that's my prediction for what it could be. But I don't know. So, the Dolphins very comfortably defeated the Texans, as expected. Many backups were rotated in by the end of the game, which has made snap percentage kind of interesting to analyze. So I didn't really do it. Raheem Mostert was inactive in Week 12, and Jeff Wilson averaged 3 yards per carry, but did score a rushing touchdown. Jeff Wilson sustained an injury during the game, but returned before it concluded, so he probably should be good for this one. Wilson rushed for over 100 yards and scored a rushing touchdown in Week 11, while Mostert only had 8 carries in that game. So are you confident that Mostert is the Dolphins' running back to start? Clearly.
Am I confident? No, not at all.
Okay. I meant Wilson. I didn't even mean Mostert, but that says a lot about this backfield.
Okay, right. So I would say that So, given the matchup, I would honestly probably prefer to not start either of them. San Francisco's been such a suffocating defense over the past few weeks, and I just think that this is going to be a game where Miami has to throw to get the ball down the field consistently.
Yeah,
so
that seems to be the preference anyways.
It is a revenge game for both of these running backs.
That's funny.
Coincidentally, both formerly being 49ers. But yeah, I think if you're starting one, it probably is Jeff Wilson. But I could certainly see an argument being made for benching both of them.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. This is a pass-heavy offense. Sometimes running backs have proven their value in this offense, but it's been kind of inconsistent. I mean, starting the season, you thought it was going to be Chase Edmonds. A lot of people probably didn't even realize that Mostert was the backup, and then he took over, and then they instantly trade for Wilson when they trade away Edmonds, and then he's kind of taken over. It's been weird. But Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both scored double-digit fantasy points, but monitor Tyreek Hill as he left the game early, most likely as a precaution, just because the game was already completely in their control.
Yeah, he's not on the injury report, so he should be completely good.
Cool. Good for him. Who's really having an amazing season. I mean, higher than his ADP. Even his ADP took a little bit of a discount, changing teams from the Chiefs, but he's really proven to be elite. And I think this is going to be really good for his legacy to show that he didn't just do it on a Andy Reid offense, who I'm sure was his coach the entire time there.
Yeah, most definitely.
All right, 49ers. They had a shutout win, 0-13, against the Saints last week. So that is that suffocating defense you were mentioning. Monitor Christian McCaffrey's knee irritation, which has led to Kyle Shanahan to deem him as day-to-day. So keep an eye on that. Elijah Mitchell is expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks with another MCL sprain, the same injury that he suffered in week 1.
But on his opposite knee.
So it's a similar timetable. I saw that you picked up, what's his name? Tyron Davis Prince. I'm kind of making that up. It's close. What was his name?
Tyrion Davis Price.
Yeah, see? Pretty close.
Yeah, see? That was a very reminiscent of our dad guessing a player's name.
So, I mean, you're expecting him just to be the backup and probably to kind of back down on what Mitchell was kind of doing to McCaffrey like 2 weeks ago.
Yes. At this point in the season, I am securing or have already secured my running back handcuffs. The last thing I want is to go into the playoffs and not have my running back handcuff if something is to happen to one of those guys going into the playoffs. So that's all that there is about that. I don't expect TDP to have a lot of a usage moving forward. I think he is going to, be a change of pace back in this offense, but they want to keep Christian McCaffrey healthy because this team does want to make a serious push.
Yeah.
Being 7-4, they are in serious contention in the NFC, and so, it's just about insurance with fantasy.
Yeah. All right, so Jawan Jennings led the team in receptions and was on the receiving end of Jimmy Garoppolo's only passing touchdown. So that made for an underwhelming performance for all 49ers players. The star of this game really was the 49ers defense. But do you expect all of the 49er regulars, so like Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, to bounce back in what should be a competitive game against the Dolphins?
Yeah, I do. Like we've been mentioning, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game in general. San Francisco may have something to say about that, but I don't really know if they have the secondary to support bottling up Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Those guys are too dynamic and explosive in their speed and their route running to really, I think, put a challenge on that team. But yeah, I'm picking the 49ers with you. Part of me really wants to go Miami in this one.
Go for it.
But I think defense wins championships, and so that's what I'm banking on here. Miami is the only team outside of Minnesota to beat, the Jets, yes. But I'm talking about earlier in the season when I thought that Buffalo was pretty much just going to run the table up until at least when they played Kansas City.
Yeah.
Miami was the team that gave Buffalo their first loss. That's what I was trying to get out.
That is true.
And so, man, part of me really wants to, but I think I'm gonna go with the team with better defense, and that's San Francisco.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think from an NFL performance perspective, I would be really scared of the 49ers' offensive versatility. And Jimmy Garoppolo's good enough to get it done. So even if I think Tua's better than him, as far as being a game changer, Jimmy Garoppolo is competent enough, and I do think that the 49ers defense is better. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, this is kind of it's on topic in the sense that it's a football question, but it's about Jimmy Garoppolo. Do you think that this season he's playing better than he was last year, or do you think it's just the addition of Christian McCaffrey and maybe the running back, probably just the changes at running back that are making him look better, or do you think he actually is playing better than last season?
I think it's probably more of what was added around him. I mean, he's just been not throwing a ton of interceptions, had 4 passing touchdowns in week 11 in Mexico City, so that's great for him. But he kind of is that guy that gets you 200 some passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. So, I mean, he's been, I think, more efficient in the decreased interception numbers, which I don't think he's super prone to throwing a ton, but still, he's not throwing many at all. I think it is more of what's added around him.
Right. More of a game manager than a franchise quarterback.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see
what fair.
Trey Lance can do when he comes back with this offense. I'm excited for that. I am.
Definitely.
All right, move on to Seahawks at Rams. I'm going to go ahead and pick the Seahawks. Which I cannot believe.
Yeah, Aaron Donald, by the way, will not be playing.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, Seahawks all the way. Who would have thought that game would be an easy pick, looking at these two teams in the beginning of the season? And this is a divisional matchup. So Geno Smith has 5 straight games with 2 passing touchdowns. Someone tell Tom Brady. I think I already made that joke somewhere else in the notes, so maybe we'll get to that later. Smith has a high enough floor to be a very solid bye-week fill-in and might be worth starting over an underperforming QB. Yeah, and DK Metcalf had a season high in receptions with 11 and targets with 15, so that's amazing. And Tyler Lockett, back-to-back games with 3 receptions, but 4 straight games with a receiving touchdown. So that's what you expected. DK Metcalf is definitely the safer play, but Lockett still has that pretty high ceiling. So if you're feeling risky enough, throw him in, and you can hope that he can get more receptions, because there was a point in the season where he was getting more than back-to-back games with 3. Kenneth Walker averaged 1.86 yards per carry. Ouch. But had 2 rushing touchdowns, so that's great. And he has 7 straight games of double-digit fantasy scores. So I think that Geno Smith and Lockett are kind of fringe, but both probably safely could make your lineup, and Metcalf and Walker are locks. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, I think Lockett has generally shown that he's worth starting, at least as a flex this season. And honestly, if anything, I think that this might be a slight downgrade for DK Metcalf just because of Jalen Ramsey. So, which, by the way, I looked at his game history, and 15 targets matched his career high back in 2020.
Oh, wow.
So, fun fact there.
That is fun.
But yeah, I think that Lockett can be a starter. And like you said, Geno can be a solid bye-week fill-in. So lots of usable fantasy assets on this roster.
Yeah. Let's talk about the direct antithesis of that, of a team that has arguably 0 fantasy assets on their offense, the Rams. So Van Jefferson led the team in fantasy points. Oh, pick him up off the waivers, right? It was only 11.9. So, And it was 3 receptions for 29 yards and a touchdown. So, I'm just going to go down the list of all these fun things. Allen Robinson won't return this season due to a foot injury, which requires surgery. That's been a really disappointing play for me to draft him where I drafted him, which was like ADP in our main league. I mean, so many analysts were saying we're so excited about Robinson this offense, and it just really did not pan out. It's disappointing.
No, well, and to be fair, I think they had every reason to be excited, considering the Rams coming off of a Super Bowl win, and now they have 3 wins to speak for. So this is not the like we talked about last week, and pretty much all of the season. It's been a historic downfall for the LA Rams, and lots of hype to result in not a lot of substance.
Yeah. Matthew Stafford is still considered week to week with his neck injury / concussion. Kyren Williams played 70% of snaps, the running back, let me just say, while averaging 3.18 yards per carry. So, I mean, they released Darrell Henderson. Cam Akers has gotten more involved in the offense, but is being just really bad. And
Yeah.
Kyron Williams was on the practice
I-
squad just probably a month ago. So,
No.
no? Oh, that's a different
he
running
was-
back that's on their offense that has
Yeah,
emerged
you're
randomly.
thinking of Ronnie Rivers.
I am thinking of Ronnie Rivers, but yeah,
Yeah.
a practice squad member
No,
has been
Kyron
relevant in
Williams-
this offense, or at least you would think
Yes.
maybe
Yes.
fantasy-wise.
No, and Kyron Williams was a player that I was advocating for earlier in the season. I rostered him at one point, had to cut ties to pick up handcuffs, as I mentioned. But I think that he does have the most upside in this offense, and how much upside is there truly in this offense? I'm not really sure. I'm not confident that he can be a fantasy asset moving forward, especially as the playoffs start to roll around. So probably just a dynasty play, and not much else.
Out of all, I didn't even mention him. Tyler Higbee, who you would think could fill in a little bit better, didn't even get a target
He's
last
a ghost.
week. Yeah, so literally. So is Kyron Williams the closest to making your starting lineup out of any Rams player?
Yeah, no, if you don't play in an IDP league, it's definitely Kyron Williams.
Yeah. We're both picking the Seahawks.
Yeah.
The Rams are
Here-
home.
here's your-
I don't know. But
Yeah. Well, here's your next game for Game of the Week contention.
Oh, there you go. Chiefs at Bengals. Look at this one. A rematch of the AFC Championship? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Some playoff game. That amazing game that we all remember, but don't remember exactly which one it was. With the Chiefs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we love talking about him, was placed on IR before his Week 12 game, and he will return in Week 16 at the earliest, so he will be absent for a while.
Well, and that's your fantasy championship. Are you really going to plug in CEH for the fantasy championship? I don't think so.
We didn't even think you should plug him in Week 2 after a good Week 1 performance, so...
God, no.
Yeah. So, in CEH's absence, Isaiah Pacheco played 51% of snaps, rushing for 69 yards and a rushing touchdown on 22 carries. That's awesome. Pacheco was averaging 17.6 carries per game over his last 3 games. But on the flip side of that, Pacheco's only had 1 reception over that period of time. So, I feel like it's a slightly better... I'll compare him to Brian Robinson, but I think it's slightly better
that's what I was
because
gonna
he's in
say.
a better offense. So,
Exactly. Yep.
so does that make him enough to make your starting lineup because of that better offense?
That's a tough question. I think what it really comes down to is that when it comes to the Kansas City Chiefs, you know this as well as anybody, that when they're at the goal line, when they're in the red zone, Patrick Mahomes starts to get real cute on how they run their offense.
Yeah.
Shovel passes to tight ends. You can have some tackle-eligible receivers out there, and like offensive linemen catching passes, I mean to say.
Yeah.
And so do I really think that Isaiah Pacheco is going to consistently find the end zone a la Jamal Williams? No.
Yeah.
But I think that he is a better version of Brian Robinson. And that's still a touchdown-dependent flex. It just depends on, what your other options are.
Yeah. No Chiefs wide receiver had double-digit fantasy points. Should I focus on one, or is it kind of like it's Travis Kelce and Mahomes are the locks, and then Pacheco's TD dependent, and then...
I know, but you still got to consider Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, as a starting option, just because, in this game he did play 38% of the snaps again. That's not his normal.
Yeah.
He was averaging closer to, about 86% of the snaps, and so when he gets back fully reintegrated in this offense, I think he's going to return value. But that's really the only player. And, it is important to note that Sky Moore is starting to get a little bit more involved in the offense, but that's really more of a dynasty conversation than anything else. I don't think in redraft that you're really starting Sky Moore in any capacity.
Yeah. No, not at all. But he is kind of appearing a little bit more than just being a kick returner, which is what he looked like for a few weeks of the season. We'll move on to
most of the season. Yeah.
We'll move on to the Bengals. So monitor Joe Mixon's concussion, which kept him out of their Week 12 game. And in his absence, Samaje Perine played in 80% of snaps, rushing for 58 yards and a touchdown, while also having 4 receptions for 35 yards. So he did well. So a good handcuff play if you have him. If Mixon is out, I would say. Hayden Hurst had a season-high 9 targets, which resulted in 6 receptions for 57 yards. So kind of reemerged to be fantasy relevant, especially as a tight end, getting those double-digit points without a touchdown. That is valuable at tight end. But he was quiet for a little stretch. And with Jamar Chase potentially coming back in Week 13, I don't know if this is really the time to now go back on potentially playing Hurst. But T. Higgins absolutely boomed in this game. I'll just say that. And I think that I ask you, how does Higgins rank rest of the season? But it doesn't really matter. You're starting him, and it's probably not looking to trade him this late.
Well, if you even can.
Yes.
I mean, considering most trade deadlines have already passed. But, T. Higgins is a player that during preseason I ranked, I believe, inside the top 12, maybe the top 15. I was really high on T. Higgins. Now, obviously, Jamar Chase being absent has aided in that. But even when Jamar Chase was healthy last season, T. Higgins was right there with him in terms of production. And so he's currently the wide receiver 12 on the dot. I think he's a high end wide receiver 2, a fringe wide receiver 1 rest of season.
Yeah, he has been performing very well, especially in Week 12.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one to pick. I think I am going to go with the Chiefs, but it is in Cincinnati, so it's tough.
Yeah, and it is a little tough to prognosticate the outcome of this one, not knowing Joe Mixon's availability.
Yeah.
But I think with the return of Jamar Chase and it being a home game, I'm going to pick the Bengals in this one.
Yeah, and Jamar Chase, it seems like he's returning, but that's not official, I don't believe.
Yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, so just keep an eye on his availability.
For sure.
But
all right,
that's who I'm picking.
It's an interesting game for sure. All right, we'll move on to Chargers at Raiders. Divisional matchup. Hooray. Justin Herbert had his best fantasy performance of the season, 274 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns and a season-high 38 rushing yards. So it looked pretty good out there. Keenan Allen played in his second straight game. Wow. Having 5 receptions on 7 targets for 49 yards and a receiving touchdown. So assuming he didn't re-injure himself, makes your lineup again. In my eyes, kind of surprisingly, because Joshua Palmer's looked like the best option beyond Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, especially whenever either of them or both of them were inactive. But DeAndre Carter had a career day with 7 receptions on 10 targets for 73 yards and a receiving touchdown. And all the analysis I did on Josh Palmer, just kind of what I was bringing up, kind of makes me think that this Carter performance is more noise. Are you more inclined to think that? Or how do you feel about it?
So I am just quickly going through his game log because, as we talked about, he has been in the league for a surprising amount of time. Yeah. And so either way, I think when it comes to Joshua Palmer and DeAndre Carter, it's kind of like flip a coin in terms of which one's going to perform better than the other in fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think as long as Mike Williams or Keenan Allen, one of the two, are unavailable, one of those guys is likely going to have a good game, but it's hard to predict who it's going to be.
I'm just saying, 22 targets for DeAndre Carter in the last 4 games and 35 for Palmer. So, you know how that makes me feel.
No, I do, and it's important to note that Mike Williams was there for at least one of those games. So Carter may have been, on the bubble in one of those weeks and lost out on some targets. But my point is that I think outside of Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert, you're really not rushing out to start that third or fourth option in Carter or Palmer. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, speaking of Austin Eckler, the RB1 in PPR scoring, I'm sure you're happy to have him on your roster. You think if I said 5 carries for 20 rushing yards, he had a bad game, but no, he had 11 receptions on 15 targets for 60 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Someone who had an even better game, though, was Josh Jacobs on the Raiders. Had a career performance.
Yeah.
Rushing for 229 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 33 carries. while also having 6 receptions for 74 receiving yards. This included a 86-yard walk-off score in overtime, so that alone was like 14.6 points.
Right.
So amazing day for quick math. Amazing day for Josh Jacobs. He's proven to have a ceiling that only Tyreek Hill can match, I guess you could say. An insanely high ceiling for sure for Josh Jacobs. So you're probably happy to have him. I'm sure you are. I mean, he had a stretch where after a good stretch of games, he seemed to regress a little bit, but then he does this, and he is the RB2 in PPR scoring and the RB1 in standard scoring. Who would have thought? Darren Waller will return in Week 14 at the earliest. So Foster Moreau, Blake alluded to this earlier, this analysis, but Foster Moreau has played in 380 of a possible 386 snaps over the last 6 weeks, so that seems enticing. But he only had 3 receptions in Week 12. Only had 3 receptions for 43 yards, but one of those was a touchdown catch, so TD dependent. And he, in those previous 6 weeks that I am also referencing, he hasn't really done a whole lot. So we love tight end talk, but are there better options available than Moreau? You think Jordan Akins, so I think that's a pretty low bar already. So there you go.
Yeah, Jordan Akins, and then I also included here in the notes Tyler Conklin. Yeah. He's rostered in less than 20% of sleeper leagues, and as long as Zach Wilson's not throwing the ball, Tyler Conklin's been a pretty solid fantasy option at tight end. He's currently the tight end 13. So I think that's an alternative if you're looking for a more, we'll say, name brand option.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Moreau is enticing because of just his snap count, and you would think that a tight end being involved that much would be good enough if you needed to put one in your lineup, but we've already provided 2 pretty lowly rostered tight ends as better options. I'm going to pick the Chargers, but it's close.
Yeah, picking this game, it is. It's a 2-point spread between these with LA having the edge on the road. I think the real thing is that with a calf issue that has sprung up for Josh Jacobs, he might be limited a little bit, and especially coming off such a massive performance last week, like a 40-touch game.
Sure.
I have to think, they're holding him out of practice for most of the week to kind of, give him that rest he clearly deserved coming into this game. But I'm going to go with the Chargers as well. I think, you know what?
It is close in our predictions, so this does matter.
No, it very much is. I think what I'm gonna. It's just Devontae Adams is just a very unique talent as well. I think the Raiders defense is going to hold him back in this one. I'm picking the Chargers.
Okay. Move on to Sunday Night Football. Colts at Cowboys.
How about back-to-back primetime games for the Colts?
Yeah, that's interesting. Go. I was thinking about that. That is interesting. I don't know. They might like Jeff Saturday. He didn't used to work for ESPN, so he's got those connections.
Picking the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, disappointing loss to the Steelers last week. Yeah, but this offense is... The players that you would expect to do well are starting to do well consistently, so that is good for the Colts.
Well, because they quit screwing around with the no-name quarterbacks.
Yeah, that is true. Jonathan Taylor has 3 straight games with 20-plus carries and a rushing touchdown, so hopefully he can continue with that volume for you in your fantasy playoffs. You most likely drafted him as the very first player off drafts, if not the second. I'm sure he fell. I doubt he fell any further than that. Matt Ryan in Week 12 only threw for 199 yards and 1 passing touchdown while also throwing an interception. Fortunately for my boy Michael Pittman, he caught that passing touchdown while having 7 receptions for 61 yards on 11 targets, so very good game for him. This was Pittman's first.
Very good.
Yeah, it is. All of those adjectives and qualifiers. This was Pittman's first receiving touchdown since Week 1, so that hasn't been great. He's been quieter than my liking of what I was expecting for him this season, but he still is solid and consistent enough, just isn't really single-handedly winning me anything. And Paris Campbell was the only other wide receiver to register a reception. Wow. And he only had 2.
Yeah.
I think that unless Matt Ryan starts slinging it again, you really can't start Campbell, and Pittman is still safe enough.
Yeah, it's weird. Paris Campbell was a player that we were seeing consistently with Matt Ryan under center, that he was performing like the team's wide receiver one. I'm not entirely convinced that he won't bounce back from this performance.
Yeah, don't drop him.
Yeah, no, and I think that, honestly, Dallas is not really the team to play many players against. Like, you have to start Jonathan Taylor, and you have to start Michael Pittman. So that kind of makes Paris Campbell a fringe flex option. And then we can talk about the tight end here.
Yeah, Jelani Woods, the tight end, had 8 receptions for 98 yards on 9 targets, which was good for the tight end 2 performance of the week. I would venture to say that this is noise. I figure you agree, because he hadn't had more than 2 receptions in the game this season before this performance in week 12. So
yeah. This is a blip on the radar, but nothing to be alarmed by.
Yeah, it is interesting though. I can't believe that Matt Ryan only threw to 2 receivers and then threw that many times to Jelani Woods. It's really weird. Anyways, the Cowboys, the heavy favorites at home, as we're both picking, as we've already said. Ezekiel Elliott played 51% of snaps, rushing for 92 yards and a rushing touchdown on 16 carries. And Tony Pollard, surprisingly, was actually less efficient, rushing for 60 yards on 18 carries, which was 2 more than Zeke. So that was kind of weird. That's usually the inverse of what happens. I would say that you're probably starting Zeke just because of his touchdown upside, and to see him be kind of efficient, that's enticing. So does Pollard make your lineup, or is he a fringe flex with Zeke being there? It's just so weird after what he does when Zeke's not there, but that really is the case.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about it not only this season, but all of last season as well. These players, they play the same position. They eat into each other's value because they both have merit in the offense, but we both agree that Tony Pollard is the more explosive-looking player, the more efficient player more often than not. Obviously, last week was a bit of an anecdotal evidence to suggest the opposite. Yeah. But yeah, Tony Pollard, I think, is still worth flexing, depending on your other options. But I think he certainly has the talent and the upside, especially in a game where they are at home, favored by more than a touchdown. There's going to be plenty of opportunities, it seems, for points to be scored by both running backs.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll talk about CeeDee Lamb real quick. We haven't focused on too much other than the rant he went on in week 1 or week 2, which I agreed with. But
well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't as bad as you make it sound, but I think it was more just to warn people that you're paying a premium.
It was too late,
for someone who has.
I mean, we ranked him pretty low in our rankings, but at the point in time we had a rant and matchup previews video, it was too late. But like I said in the notes, I would say CeeDee Lamb proved us wrong by being the wide receiver 7, but it is still slightly lower than his ADP. But all that to say that Lamb has been very consistent this season, only scoring single-digit fantasy points twice this season. So you're still probably happy to have him.
Yeah, and I'm not rooting against him out of spite, but there is a lot of games left to be played. So I'll just say that.
A threat. Dalton Schultz.
No, okay, it was just not to get too off topic, but it was just because you were paying for a premium. You were paying him at his absolute peak, and that's never something that you should advocate for when drafting a player, especially when it's someone who's unproven generally in that role. So
yeah, I think we both
that's
looked at him as a low-end wide receiver 1, and that's probably still why I'll rank him next season.
Yeah,
and I think that's fair.
Yeah, no, and it was never like, oh, this guy's a bust or anything crazy. Yeah.
Just like he was.
It was just that. He's going a bit
some
too
rankings
high
might
in
have
drafts.
Some rankings might have had him slightly above Diggs, and I would have never let that happen. It was close, at least, between them two.
I never would have let that happen.
Nope, wouldn't have. Dalton Schultz caught 2 touchdowns on 4 receptions. So I have a question. Is Schultz TD dependent all of a sudden? Because usually his thing has been not needing touchdowns to get double digits, and that's what's made him so valuable.
No, I don't think so. I think, honestly, you don't get too picky when it comes to tight ends. he still performed well. And prior to this, like you mentioned, he's been getting more targets and more receptions and more yards in general and less touchdowns. So yeah, just take the good with the bad. And with Schultz, it's mostly been good.
Yeah, it's been a weird season with him, with kind of injury strucken. But yeah, I agree. You probably can't get too cute with him. We're both picking the Cowboys.